The crack of breaking wood isn't exactly the kind of wake-up call a man hopes for before breakfast. Yet there it was again, my ranch gate, creaking in protest as Karen's spotless white SUV smashed through like she owned the road. To her, my land wasn't private property. It was nothing more than a convenient shortcut. No wave, no permission. Just her sunglasses flashing like she was some self-crowned queen of suburbia. The first time, I brushed it off as an accident. The second time, I figured she was pushing limits. By the third, it was clear she was flat out daring me. And let me be clear, I'm not the kind of man who reacts kindly to being challenged, especially not on my own land. What Karen didn't realize was that while she strutted around like HOA royalty, I was quietly preparing a trap she'd never see coming. But before I get into that, drop a comment below. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is for you. When I first bought this ranch, I imagined peace, endless skies, cattle grazing in the early light, and a sturdy wooden gate closing with a firm thud each night. After 3 decades of construction work, dust filling my lungs, and HOA rules dictating even the color of my mailbox, all I craved was quiet. I didn't put in 30 years of work, just to have some clipboard warrior banging on my door about community standards. My ranch sat on the very edge of Pine Hollow, a massive HOA-run subdivision with more rules than the state constitution. Thankfully, my deed sat outside their reach. I wasn't a member, didn't pay their dues, and sure didn't answer to their president. The boundary was clear, my gate, a solid cedar-framed arch I had built with my own 2 hands, iron hinges swinging across the gravel drive. That was my line in the sand, and I took pride in it. I hadn't even settled in for a full month before she appeared. Karen, her blonde bob trimmed to perfection, oversized sunglasses, and a brand new SUV sporting an HOA strong bumper sticker. She slowed just enough, rolled her window halfway down, and flashed a smile that never touched her eyes. "Lovely place," she said. "Thanks," I answered. But before I could say another word, she hit the gas and plowed straight through my closed gate. The hinges shrieked, cedar scraped against gravel, and before I even registered what happened, she was tearing across my pasture, dust trailing behind her like she was late to her own coronation. I just stood there stunned. My first thought was maybe she's lost. Maybe her GPS told her my ranch was some kind of shortcut. But the look on her face, that smug, dismissive half-smile as she flicked her fingers in the rear view, told me everything. No, this wasn't a mistake. That evening, I found myself fixing the gate, muttering under my breath. I reinforced the hinges, drove the posts deeper into the soil, and convinced myself it was just bad. Manners, something that wouldn't happen again. But of course it did. A week later, same story. I caught the rumble of her SUV just in time to see it crest the hill, heading straight for my gate. This time, she didn't even tap the brakes. She tore through like she was storming Normandy. I bolted onto the porch, arms flailing. "Hey, that's private property," I yelled. Her answer? A sharp, mocking laugh. She leaned out her window and hollered, "Community easement," before vanishing down the drive. Community easement? My blood was boiling. I knew my deed backward and forward. No easement, no shared road, no right-of-way. But she said it with the authority of scripture, straight out of the book of Karen. That night, I headed to the local feed store for supplies. Sure enough, a couple of old-timers there just shook their heads when I brought her up. "You got Karen driving through your land?" one asked, spitting sunflower seeds into a paper cup. "Afraid so," I said. "Good luck with that," he muttered. "She runs the HOA like her own little kingdom. Folks been battling her for years," the other aided. "She'll bleed you dry with fines and complaints if you're not careful. Best just let her be." That was their advice. Let her be. Let her smash through my gate week after week like she owned the place. Not on my land. Not in my lifetime. The third time it happened, I caught her red-handed. I was stacking firewood by the barn when I heard that all-too-familiar crunch of gravel. I dropped the logs and stormed out. There she sat, SUV engine growling right in front of my gate. When she spotted me, she smirked. "You really ought to keep this open," she called through the rolled-down window. "This is my gate," I fired back. "My property. You're trespassing." She lifted her chin, lips curling like she'd tasted something bitter. "Don't be so selfish. This road saves me 10 minutes every morning. It's called community spirit." "Community spirit?" I barked a laugh, though there was nothing funny about it. "Lady, this is trespassing. "You're damaging my property," I warned. Her smirk only tightened. "You're new here. Maybe you don't understand. The HOA sets the rules in this community. You're not above them." That was the first time I heard the word HOA spoken like it carried some divine authority, as if wearing the title made her queen of a council of busybodies. I told her to turn that SUV around. She didn't. Instead, she gunned it straight through. Dust sprang across my boots. I fixed the gate again, but at that point it wasn't about cedar or hinges anymore. It was about principle. Every splinter felt like an insult. Every dent was her laughter thrown in my face. And then came the worst part. The other board members began copying her. More than once I watched a convoy of HOA cars rolling through my property like it was their personal shortcut. They waved at each other, waved at me, like I was nothing more than the hired groundskeeper. Then one afternoon I pulled an envelope out of my mailbox. Official HOA letterhead, a violation notice. My stomach dropped as I read the words. "Dear resident, you are in violation of HOA standards for maintaining unsightly structures. The ranch gate at the entrance of your property does not conform to community aesthetics. Please remove it immediately or face fines." I nearly laughed myself sick. I wasn't even part of their HOA. My land was separate, deeded in full and paid for outright. Yet there it was, black ink on white paper, demanding I tear down the very gate they'd been ramming through. I drove straight to the town clerk's office just to double-check the records. Sure enough, I was right. No easements, no HOA authority. My gate was mine, fair and square. Still, that letter felt like the first warning shot. Karen wasn't just some pushy neighbor behind the wheel. She was laying the groundwork for a fight. And if 30 years of building houses taught me anything, it's this. Every wall, every roof, every gate only stands as strong as the man willing to defend it. Karen thought paperwork and SUVs could scare me off. But I'd built more than gates in my lifetime. I'd built foundations before, and now I was about to build something that would put an end to her. Shortcuts once and for all. By the close of that first month, I realized my quiet refuge had turned into a battlefield. Karen wasn't just driving through my gate, she was flaunting it. The harder I pushed back, the bolder she grew. At first it was small. Once or twice a week, usually mornings, her SUV tires tore across my gravel drive, dust clouds rolling over my porch like a desert storm. But soon she grew brazen. Afternoons, evenings, even late at night. I'd be out back feeding the horses and hear the low, steady growl of her engine somewhere beyond the ridge. Sure enough, headlights would cut through the dark, my gate swinging wide like some toll booth she refused to pay. Then one Sunday morning I made up my mind to block her way. I parked my old Chevy pickup just inside the gate, figuring if she wanted her shortcut, she'd at least have to face me eye to eye. I perched on the tailgate, sipping my coffee, just waiting. Didn't take long. Dust rose on the horizon, and soon the familiar outline of her SUV came charging down the road. She slowed when she spotted me, then leaned out her window wearing that same smug grin. "You're wasting your time," she called. "This road is for everyone." "No, ma'am," I answered calmly. "This road is mine. The deed makes it clear." Her sunglasses flashed as she shot back. "You can't own land that blocks community access. That's against the law." I nearly spit out my coffee. Against the law? I'd checked those county records twice over. She was bluffing, but she delivered it with the confidence of someone who thought she was the law. "I suggest you turn around," I told her firmly. Her smirk only grew wider. "And I suggest you move your truck." We locked eyes, the silence stretching like a full minute. At last she huffed, jerked her SUV into reverse, and tore off in a storm of gravel. For a split second I thought I'd finally won. But the very next day I came home from town to find my gate knocked flat on the ground. Posts snapped, hinges bent like thin wire. Fresh tire tracks scored across my pasture. Karen had stepped it up. And it wasn't just her anymore. That week I spotted at least 2 other HOA vehicles following her lead. A maroon minivan sporting a pine, hollow HOA decal, and a silver sedan with the board treasurer's name on the license frame. They rolled across my land like it had been deeded to them personally. It wasn't random. It was organized. Karen was turning my property into the HOA's personal shortcut. Against my better judgment, I tried reason again. One evening I walked into the HOA office, a brick building that looked more like a law firm than a neighborhood association. There she sat behind a polished desk piled with binders, looking up at me with pure disdain, as if I were some farmhand tracking mud on her marble floors. We need to talk, I said, steady. Oh, good, she replied, syrupy. You're here about your fines. My what? I asked. She slid a sheet of paper across the desk. A list of so-called violations stared back at me. Unapproved structures, unkempt land, failure to comply with HOA road easements. Every line had a dollar figure beside it, totaling close to $3,000. You're out of your mind, I said flatly. I'm not even in your HOA. Her voice hardened. Don't play games. Every property here falls under our community charter. That's a lie and you know it, I snapped. The county clerk confirmed it. I'm outside your boundary lines. Karen leaned back in her chair, tapping polished nails against the armrest. Boundaries are flexible. When community welfare is at stake, boundaries are legal, I shot back. And mine aren't flexible. Her lips thinned to a hard line. You'll regret this stubbornness. That was when it hit me. We weren't arguing over a fence. This was a slow squeeze, a war of attrition. She'd hunt me down, harass me, intimidate me. Anything to wear me down until I folded. And she wasn't alone. Later that week, while I was fixing fence posts, one of her board members, a wiry man, clutching a clipboard, strode up like he owned the whole place. Sir, you can't keep rebuilding this gate, he announced. The HOA voted. The road stays open. I wiped sweat from my brow. Funny, I don't remember voting in your HOA because I'm not in it. He jotted something on his clipboard. Failure to comply will result in further penalties. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. You'll need more than a clipboard to scare me. Pal, he stomped off muttering. Karen will handle you. And handle me she did. One night near midnight, the sound of splintering wood jolted me awake. I grabbed a flashlight and ran outside. There it was again, the gate torn to pieces. And in the distance, the fading glow of Karen's SUV taillights vanishing into the night. This time she didn't even bother with excuses. No shouting match, no fake apology, just raw defiance. I stood there in the dark, fists clenched, staring at the wreckage. The cedar planks I'd cut, the hinges I'd welded, scattered like toothpicks. My ranch no longer felt like mine. It felt violated. The next morning I caught whispers at the general store. She's cutting through his land again. Won't end well. But then came the reminder. Nobody beats Karen. She's got the sheriff on speed dial. The county clerk in her pocket. That's when it sank in. I couldn't rely on law or reason. Karen wasn't going to stop because deep down she believed she didn't have to. In her mind, the HOA was untouchable and she wore its crown. But me, I wasn't raised to bow down. Decades of building taught me that when something keeps collapsing, you don't slap on a patch. You rebuild it stronger. Sometimes that means using steel instead of wood. As I gathered the shattered pieces of my gate, a thought began to grow. A dangerous one. What if next time Karen took her shortcut, she didn't just break timber? What if she ran straight into something she couldn't laugh off? That night I sat on the porch staring at the stars, turning the idea over in my head. Karen thought this was a game of fines and notices. I was finished with games. I was going to set a trap, and when she hit it, she'd never forget. By then, every low growl of an SUV made my pulse spike. Karen had burrowed under my skin in a way few ever had. It wasn't about a gate anymore. It was about ownership, about respect, about whether a man's land was truly his when someone else claimed a right to it. The morning after she smashed through again, I opened my mailbox to find another envelope. This time it wasn't even dressed up in politeness. Notice of violation, ranch entrance obstructs community traffic. Remove gate within 7 days or face daily fines of $250. I stood on the porch, the letter trembling in my grip. I wasn't part of their HOA, yet somehow they believed phony fines would wear me down. The afternoon, Karen herself strutted up my porch with a clipboard in hand, her heels clicking on the wooden steps, like she was walking into a courtroom she already presided over. You've been warned, she said, waving the paper like a gave. Take that gate down, or the HOA will escalate to legal action. I leaned against the doorframe, arms folded tight. Karen, this isn't your land. This isn't your road. You don't get to make the rules here. Her face flushed crimson. I am the president of Pine Hollow HOA, and every road within this community, and I cut her short. This isn't within your community. My deed proves it. For just a second, I caught the flicker of doubt in her eyes, but Karen wasn't the type to admit defeat. She stiffened her blazer and jabbed the paper toward my chest. You're a selfish man, she spat. You're denying your neighbors access. This road is a public benefit. I barked out a laugh. You mean it's a shortcut for your coffee runs? Don't dress it up like some noble cause. Her eyes narrowed, venom flashing. You'll regret this. With that, she spun on her heel and stormed off. The next week turned into a circus. HOA board members started inspections of my ranch. Men with clipboards appeared uninvited, leaning over my fence like vultures, snapping photos of my barn, my cattle, even the hay stacked neatly out back. I confronted one of them, a wiry fellow with hollow eyes and a smug grin, and he had the nerve to say, "Documenting violations. Violations of what?" I demanded. "Community standards," he said flatly. I laughed so hard it was bitter. "This isn't your community." He didn't bother to answer, just jotted something down and walked off like a man delivering a verdict. That night, while I sat on my porch, I heard the crunch of tires on gravel again. Karen's SUV cut through the darkness, headlights glaring like spotlights. She didn't slow for the gate. She plowed straight through the patchwork repair. I'd managed. My dogs erupted in barks, my horses bolted in panic, and she sailed across my land like it was a highway built for her alone. Watching her vanish into the night, something inside me shifted. Irritation turned to iron resolve. The breaking point came 3 nights later, just before midnight. Tires screeched. Then the sharp crack of wood shattering split the silence. I grabbed my shotgun, slinging it over my shoulder, not to fire, but to make a statement, and charged outside. By the time I reached the drive, my gate was rubble again. But this time, Karen wasn't alone. 3 cars in total, hers in the lead. 2 more packed with HOA board members, stormed through like they were in a parade. Their headlights bounced across my pasture, their laughter and hoots ringing out like school kids sneaking into a carnival. I screamed until my throat burned, but they didn't slow, didn't look back. They were making one thing clear. In their minds, my land already belonged to them. The next morning, I drove into town to complain at the sheriff's office. The deputy listened, chewing a toothpick, then just shook his head. "Without video proof, it's your word against theirs," he said. "And you know Karen's got pull. She'll paint this as you blocking a community road, so that was, that no help from the law?" I drove home furious, knuckles white on the wheel. If the law wouldn't protect me, I'd protect myself. That evening, as I hammered the final hinge onto a makeshift replacement gate, Karen showed up again. No pleasantries this time. She stepped out of her SUV and said, "You're wasting your time. We'll keep driving through until that gate is gone. Accept it." I straightened, sweat running down my back. "You think you own me? Think again." "This is my land and I'll defend it," I told her. Her smile was cold and practiced. "We'll see," she said. "The board meets tomorrow. We're voting to remove your gate permanently, with or without your consent." I stared at her for a long beat, then leaned in just enough to make sure she knew I meant every word. "You may have your board, Karen, but I've got something better. A backbone and a plan." For a flash, her eyes shifted, maybe doubt, maybe curiosity, before she slid back into her SUV and drove off. That night at my kitchen table, I scratched ideas across scrap paper. Wood wasn't cutting it. Hinges weren't cutting it. If I wanted Karen to stop, I needed something she couldn't bully with horsepower and entitlement. Something that actually bit back. Steel, reinforcement, hidden defenses. The clearer I thought it through, the more obvious it became. This wasn't a gate dispute anymore. It was a trap. A build that wouldn't just block her, it would humiliate her. I let out a low, dangerous chuckle. For weeks she'd treated my land like her personal racetrack. Soon enough she'd learned some gates don't just swing open, some gates bite. By the time I snuffed the lantern and turned in, my mind was made up. The power struggle was finished. I was done reacting and done patching things up. The next move would be mine, and when Karen barreled through again, she'd find out exactly how bad it feels to underestimate a man who's had enough. I woke before dawn the next day with a clarity I hadn't known in weeks. Enough was enough. Karen and her little HOA posse thought they'd boxed me in, but they'd forgotten one simple truth: I don't give up. I'm a builder. 3 decades on job sites taught me how to raise houses from nothing, replace rotten beams and pour foundations that outlast storms. If I could build a home to shrug off a hurricane, I could damn well build a gate to stop Karen. But this wasn't going to be just a gate. It was going to be a trap. I started with steel, not that flimsy aluminum you get at big box stores, but industrial-grade beams I'd salvaged years back from a demolition job. They'd sat behind my barn gathering dust. Now they shone with purpose. Purpose. Next came the posts. Instead of cedar, I bored deep and set 6-foot steel posts into concrete footings, each reinforced with rebar cages. Every post could take thousands of pounds of force, I made sure of it. I welded crossbars, added angled supports, and tucked hidden reinforcements that turned the frame into something more like a fortress gate than a simple ranch entrance. Then I clad the front with thick cedar plank, so from a distance it still looked like my old, humble wooden gate. But behind that rustic face was a solid wall of steel, and I wasn't finished. Stopping Karen's SUV wasn't enough. I wanted to end the shortcut for good. So I got clever. I dug shallow trenches just past the gate and filled them with tire-popping surprises. Hardened steel spikes set in concrete troughs camouflaged under gravel. If anyone tried to ram through again, the gate would hold, and the spikes would shred their tires like tissue. A design born of frustration but finished with precision. Every measurement was exact, every weld flawless. I worked by the flickering lantern light, steel glinting, sweat running down my back. My dogs lay nearby, heads on their paws, eyes following every move as if they knew their master was preparing for war. Neighbors passed on the main road curious. One or two stopped. "You fixing that gate again?" one asked. "Not fixing," I replied with a grin. "Upgrading?" They raised eyebrows, but no one pressed further. "Around here, you learn not to meddle in another man's feud." Naturally, word made its way to Karen. 3 days into the project, I spotted her SUV idling just beyond the property line. She sat watching through tinted windows, cell phone in hand, probably recording. I kept hammering, steel ringing under each strike, ignoring her stare. Finally, she rolled down her window. "You really think you can stop progress?" She sneered. I didn't even look up. "No," I said evenly, "but I can stop you." Her laugh was sharp, brittle. "We'll see. The board meets tomorrow. We're filing an injunction." "Good luck," I muttered, sparks flying as I welded another seam. Karen's SUV roared off, tires spitting gravel in protest. That night, my buddy Hank dropped by. An old rancher, face weathered like leather, hands calloused from decades of mending fences. He leaned against a post watching me work. "You're playing with fire, you know that," he said. "I know," I replied. "She's got the sheriff on speed dial. She'll scream harassment the second this backfires. Then I'll make sure it doesn't backfire." He studied me for a long beat, then chuckled. "Hell, I like your style. Need an extra pair of hands?" Together we finished the last reinforcements, tightening bolts, testing welds, checking alignments. When we finally stepped back, drenched in sweat and exhausted, the gate stood proud, deceptively simple on the outside, indestructible within. "Looks just like the old one," Hank said. "But it ain't, is it?" I shook my head. Not even close. By the 5th day, the trap was complete. The gate swung effortlessly on reinforced hinges, locking into steel brackets buried deep in concrete. The trenches were hidden beneath gravel, the spikes invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. Even the posts were painted to match the old cedar, blending flawlessly with the ranch's rustic aesthetic. To anyone else, it looked like the same fragile barrier Karen had demolished a dozen times. But to me it was justice incarnate. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the horizon in gold and crimson, I sat on my porch staring at the finished work. My hands blistered, my back aching, yet my heart was steady. For weeks, Karen had treated me like some helpless rancher she could push around. She believed fines, threats, and SUVs made her invincible. But she'd forgotten the oldest rule in the book. Every bully eventually hits a wall they can't knock down. And tomorrow, when she came roaring through again, she'd discover just how hard that wall could strike. I leaned back in my chair, dogs at my feet, and whispered to the quiet evening air, "Come on, Karen." "I'm ready." The trap was in place. All that remained was waiting. And if there was one thing I'd learned about Karen, it was that patience was not her strong suit. She couldn't resist proving herself. Had to win, had to assert dominance. Sooner or later, she'd come barreling across my land again. It didn't take long. On a bright Saturday afternoon, I heard it. The low, throaty growl of her SUV growing, louder and louder until the gravel shivered beneath her tires. I set my coffee cup on the porch rail, leaned back and watched. There she was, perfect hair, oversized sunglasses, jaw clenched with that smug determination I'd come to know all too well. Behind her, 2 more vehicles followed. The HOA treasurer's maroon minivan and another board member sedan, a convoy of arrogance. Karen didn't slow, not a fraction. She revved harder, speeding as if smashing my gate fueled her power. I held my breath as her SUV closed the distance. Then it happened. The moment her bumper hit the gate, it refused to budge. Instead of splintering like before, it stood firm, anchored to its steel core, the impact sounding like a gunshot, metal against metal, echoing finality. Her SUV jolted violently. The front crumpled with a sickening crunch. Airbags deployed. White smoke puffed from the windows. Tires screamed against gravel as momentum carried her another foot before the reinforced steel held her fast, like a fly trapped in amber. And then came the spikes. As her rear tires skidded across the hidden trench, the steel teeth bit deep, tearing rubber apart with a sound that made me wince even from the porch. Pop, pop, pop. Within seconds, her SUV sagged forward on shredded wheels, hissing like a wounded beast. The convoy behind her screeched to a halt, too late to intervene. The minivan swerved into the ditch, fishtailing before grinding to a halt. The sedan braked hard, horn blaring, narrowly avoiding a collision with her bumper. Dust hung in the summer air, settling over the scene like smoke after a battlefield skirmish. For a long moment, everything was still. Then the screaming erupted. Karen flung open her door, stumbling into a cloud of airbag dust. She coughed, eyes wide, face twisted with fury. "What have you done?" she shrieked, pointing at me as if I had committed a crime against humanity. I stayed seated on the porch, calm as a preacher on Sunday morning. My dogs barked but stayed at my side, tails stiff with tension. "What I've done," I called back, "is stop you from trespassing." Her voice cracked, shrill with rage. "This is illegal. You've put lives at risk." I stood slowly, descended the steps, and walked toward the wreck. The closer I got, the clearer the scene became. Her SUV's bumper crushed like a soda can, airbags sagging, fluids dripping onto the gravel, a total mess. But I smiled. "You were warned," I said evenly. Over and over. "You chose this." She stomped her heel into the ground, trembling with rage. "You're finished. The HOA will bury you in lawsuits." I raised an eyebrow. "On what grounds?" "You drove through a private gate on private property without permission. That's trespassing." Lucky for me, I tapped my pocket and pulled out a small device. This time I'd installed cameras. I pointed to the posts. Sure enough, discrete security cams were mounted at angles, red recording lights flashing. Her face went pale beneath the dust and makeup. "You wouldn't," she whispered. "I would," I replied. By now, neighbors had gathered along the main road, drawn by the commotion. Phones were out, recording every moment. A few chuckles rippled through the crowd as they saw Karen standing in front of her immobilized SUV, red-faced and sputtering. "Looks like the Queen's lost her crown," one man muttered loud enough for everyone to hear. Laughter erupted. The HOA treasurer crawled out of the minivan, limping slightly, his clipboard still clutched like a shield. He tried to speak, but the crowd's jeers drowned him out. The sedan driver didn't even get out, face buried in his palms. Karen spun around, glaring at the neighbors. "Stop laughing. This is a serious violation." But the more she yelled, the harder people laughed. The sight of Pine Hollow's self-proclaimed ruler, stranded, humiliated, and powerless, was irresistible, and me? I just stood there, arms crossed, soaking it all in. Eventually, the sheriff arrived, lights flashing. He stepped out, surveying the scene with raised eyebrows. "What in the blazes happened here?" he demanded. Karen ran to him like a child seeking protection. "He set a trap. He sabotaged the road. He could have killed us." The sheriff turned to me. "Is that true?" I shook my head. "This isn't a public road. It's my private property. She's been trespassing for weeks." I reinforced my gate and installed cameras. "You'll find everything you need on the footage." Karen's jaw dropped. "You can't," she started, but the sheriff's voice cut sharp. "Ma'am, you've been warned before about pushing boundaries. If these cameras show what he says, you're the one in trouble." The crowd erupted in cheers, phones held high. Karen's face flushed crimson, eyes darting from me to the sheriff to the neighbors, recording every moment of her downfall. For the first time, she was speechless. I walked up to her SUV, tapped the hood, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Shortcuts closed. Karen." The crowd erupted with laughter and whistles echoing down the road. Karen covered her face, screaming muffled curses, before retreating back into her ruined SUV. The sheriff just shook his head. We'll be in touch, but from the looks of it, you're in the clear. I gave a slow nod, watching as tow trucks clanked and groaned, hauling away her convoy of shame. When the dust finally settled over Pine Hollow, I felt something I hadn't in weeks, peace. Because Karen had finally learned the hard way that not every gate can be broken. Some gates fight back. But if there's one thing I'd come to know about Karen, it was that she never admitted defeat. Even with her SUV crumpled, her tires shredded, and half the neighborhood laughing at her downfall, she wasn't finished. No, humiliation only made her more dangerous. And sure enough, the very next morning, I opened my mailbox to find a thick, heavy envelope waiting for me. Inside was a stack of papers stamped with official-looking seals. At the top, notice of legal action. According to the document, the HOA was suing me for reckless endangerment, property damage, and willful obstruction of a community easement. Their demand? That I not only remove my gate permanently, but also pay damages for the supposed emotional distress suffered by Karen and her board. The cherry on top? They actually wanted me to cover the repair costs for Karen's wrecked SUV. I laughed so hard, I nearly choked on my coffee. Still, the sheer audacity of it made my blood run hot. Here I was, the man who'd been trespassed on, vandalized and harassed for months, and somehow I was the one being painted as the criminal. Not a chance. I didn't waste a second. I drove straight into town and sat down with Martha, a sharp-eyed attorney who'd been knee-deep in property law longer than Karen had been terrorizing Pine Hollow. She skimmed the stack of papers, shook her head, and smirked. "Classic HOA overreach," she said flatly. "They don't have jurisdiction over your land, and they know it. But they're banking on you folding under pressure." I leaned back in my chair. "Folding isn't in my vocabulary." She chuckled, eyes glinting. "Good. Then let's have some fun." Within the week, Martha had filed a countersuit, trespassing, destruction of private property, harassment, and even attempted fraud through false fines. And thanks to my cameras, we had everything on tape. Karen plowing through the gate, HOA members tailgating her, and the wreckage afterward. When she realized I wouldn't back down, she doubled down. 2 days later, I pulled up to find a cluster of board members posted outside my gate, clipboards raised, shouting loud enough for the whole street to hear. "This man is dangerous," one cried. "He set a trap that could have killed children. Unsafe structures. Violations everywhere," another added. Karen stood in the middle, brandishing papers like a general rallying her troops. "We cannot allow one stubborn man to endanger our community. He will pay for what he's done," she declared. Neighbors gathered, but this time they didn't rally to her side. They murmured, some shaking their heads, others filming with their phones. The tide was turning. I stepped onto my porch, arms folded, and raised my voice. "You all want the truth? Watch the footage. Every time she rammed that gate, every bogus fine, every act of trespassing, it was all caught on camera." I pointed to the gathering. "You've all witnessed it with your own eyes. This isn't about protecting anyone. It's about control." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, swelling into shouts. Someone called out, "We're sick of the HOA bullying us." Another voice rang, "That's right, stand your ground, neighbor." Karen's face blanched beneath layers of makeup, though she tried to stand firm, shrieking, "Lies! All lies!" But the damage was already done. Her empire was cracking. The real collapse came at the court hearing. Karen showed up in a blazing red suit, clutching a mountain of binders, her board members trailing, nervously behind like ducklings, afraid of being left behind. She strutted into the courtroom as though she owned the place, flashing practiced smiles at spectators like a politician on the campaign trail. When the judge called the case, Karen's lawyer launched into a performance, painting me as a menace who had jeopardized the entire community with a so-called booby-trapped gate. They tried to paint me as some paranoid hermit, a bitter man clinging to imaginary property rights. But then Martha rose, calm, sharp, and devastatingly precise. "Your Honor," she began, "the evidence will show that my client's land sits completely outside the HOA's authority. These fines, these threats, they are fraudulent. And as for endangerment, the only real danger here came from the reckless trespassing of the HOA, president and her associates. With a click of her remote, the courtroom screens flickered to life. Footage filled the room. Karen's SUV slamming into the fortified gate, tires shredding on the hidden spikes, neighbors' laughter echoing in the background. Then came the earlier clips, each reckless drive-through, each arrogant smirk. every time she shouted about her so-called community easement. By the time the montage ended, the courtroom buzzed with whispers. Even the judge leaned back, unimpressed by Karen's theatrics. And when Karen was finally called to testify, her mask cracked. She raged, jabbing a finger toward me. "I am the president," she shrieked. "He can't defy me. He can't defy the HOA." The judge's gavel came down hard. "This is a court of law, not one of your board meetings. Sit down." In that single moment, her credibility collapsed like a house of cards. The ruling followed swiftly and without hesitation. Every single HOA claim was thrown out. Instead, the court ordered the association to pay me damages for trespassing and destruction of private property. Karen herself was personally fined for harassment and reckless driving. And then came the final blow. The security footage was entered into the public record, which meant it could be accessed, copied, and inevitably leaked. And leaked it was. Within days, clips of Karen's SUV crumpling against my fortified gate spread across social media like wildfire. The internet tore into it with glee. Memes popped up overnight, each more brutal than the last. Show Karen versus the gate of justice. One viral edit froze, perfectly on her stunned expression while a booming soundtrack played. The caption stamped across the screen, "You shall not pass." By the end of the week, her humiliation wasn't just local gossip, it was worldwide entertainment. Back in Pine Hollow, the fallout hit like a storm. Neighbors who had stayed silent for years finally found their voices. Stories of Karen's bullying spilled out, phony fines, veiled threats, intimidation at every turn. The board began to crumble from within, members resigning one after another, unwilling to go down with her sinking ship. By the end of the month, the HOA's name was mud. Its funds were bled dry by legal battles and Karen's recklessness. And Karen herself? She stood alone, her power stripped, her influence shattered, her allies gone. As for me, I sat on my porch one golden evening, coffee in hand, the sun setting behind my newly indestructible gate. Victory had a taste, and it was sweet. The war wasn't just won. It had been dragged into the light for all to see. When the dust from the courtroom finally settled, Pine Hollow didn't feel like the same place. For the first time since I'd moved in, my mornings belonged to me. No growl of Karen's SUV tearing down the street. No parade of HOA board members using my ranch as their shortcut. Just the rustle of the tall grass, the soft nicker of my horses, and the steady creak of the porch chair as I sipped my coffee. For the first time in years, it wasn't just quiet. It was peace. The kind of peace I dreamed of when I first bought this land. But as sweet as the silence was, I knew better. With people like Karen, silence wasn't surrender, it was plotting. So I kept my guard up. Weeks drifted by, though, and the closest I came to her was a flash of blonde disappearing into her front door. Head down, avoiding every neighbor's stare. Whispers spread through Pine Hollow like wildfire. Karen's downfall had become neighborhood folklore. The once untouchable president of the HOA was now nothing more than a warning. Her name muttered with equal parts scorn and amusement. For a while, I let myself believe she'd finally learned her lesson. Then one afternoon, the mailman handed me a certified letter. Karen's name stamped bold across the top. I tore it open to find her proposal, a settlement. If I agreed to remove my menacing gate and allow limited community access, she'd put the feud to rest. She dropped the last of her complaints, wrapping them instead in polished words about moving forward and healing divisions. Actually laughed out loud. Healing divisions. After everything she'd pulled, this wasn't peace, it was another power grab. So I drafted my reply. 1 page, 2 sentences. There is no community easement. I own the road and I have the deed to prove it. Here's the twist. While Karen was busy screaming about community rights and filing bogus fines, I had quietly dug into the county records. Not only did I confirm my ranch sat entirely outside HOA jurisdiction, but I uncovered something bigger. That road she worshipped, the so-called shortcut she paraded as community, property wasn't public at all. It was mine. Deeded, paid for, legally untouchable. All those years, Karen and her board hadn't been defending their rights. They'd been trespassing on mine. Every dollar she burned on lawsuits, every ounce of energy she poured into controlling me, collapsed under the weight of a single document. I'd been sitting on that knowledge like a loaded gun, waiting for the perfect moment. And now the trigger had been pulled. When Karen read my reply, the meltdown was instant. She stormed up my drive one last time, letter clutched in her fist like a weapon. "Fraud!" she screamed, her voice carrying over the fields. "You can't own that road, it belongs to the community." I leaned against the porch railing, arms folded, calm as stone. "Check the records, Karen. County clerk's office. Deeds in my name. Always has been." Her face crumpled, eyes bulging with disbelief. She sputtered like an engine out of gas. That's impossible." "No," I said evenly. "What's impossible is you ever setting foot on this road again. Consider yourself trespassed." Neighbors had gathered once more, phones raised, capturing every word like it was the season finale of a long-running drama. And when Karen realized she was outnumbered, out-recorded and utterly out of power, something inside her snapped. She let out a strangled shriek, slammed her heel into the dirt and spun on her heel, storming off for the last time. From that day forward, Karen never so much as touched my gate again. The HOA, stripped of its tyrant queen, limped along in silence, its remaining members more concerned with trimming lawns than bullying ranchers. As for me, my ranch finally became the sanctuary I'd dreamed of. The gate stood tall, stronger than ever, guarding not just my land but my dignity. And each time I walked past it, I couldn't help but smile, not only because I'd won, but because I'd done it the right way. I never lowered myself to Karen's level of lies, bullying, and intimidation. Instead, I built something solid, stood firm, and let the truth carry the weight of justice. Because sometimes justice doesn't show up in uniforms or courtrooms. It shows up in the form of something simple like a gate that refuses to fall no matter how many times arrogance crashes against it. And for me, watching that gate stand tall was the sweetest victory I could ever ask for. Looking back now, I see this story was never really about a gate, or an SUV, or even a woman named Karen. It was about boundaries, about the strength it takes to defend them when they're tested. Life will always throw people like Karen in your path. People who believe rules don't apply to them, who laugh when you say no, who push and push as though your limits mean nothing. They'll test your patience, chip away at your resolve, and try to force you into surrender. But here's the truth, you always have a choice. You can break, or you can build. I chose to build, and that decision made all the difference. That's the lesson I want to leave with you. Because in life, your gate might not be made of steel and timber. It might be your time, your energy, your dignity, or even your peace of mind. Whatever it is, never let anyone walk all over it just because they think they have the right. Draw your boundaries. Strengthen them. And when someone refuses to honor them, stand tall and don't give in. Because respect isn't something handed out freely. It's something that's earned. And sometimes it has to be demanded. So let me leave you with this question. What's the gate in your life that you need to protect? Share your answer in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Because trust me, there are plenty more HOA battles, Karen meltdowns, and stories of sweet revenge on the way. It might be your time, your energy, your dignity, or even your peace of mind. Whatever it is, never let anyone walk all over it just because they think they have the right. Draw your boundaries. Strengthen them. And when someone refuses to honor them, stand tall and don't give in. Because respect isn't something handed out freely. It's something that's earned. And sometimes it has to be demanded. So let me leave you with this question. What's the gate in your life that you need to protect? Drop your answer in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Because trust me, there are plenty more HOA battles, Karen meltdowns, and stories of sweet revenge coming your way. And remember, guard your gate.